When industry insiders talk about the most underrated wrestlers out there, one name that keeps reappearing over and over again is Christian Cage. Sure, he's been a world champion in multiple companies, but it's always felt like, for one reason or another, he's never quite reached the same heights as his contemporaries. That being said though, as one of the smoothest wrestlers inside the ring, and one of the most charismatic outside of it, Captain Charisma is, and will always be, one of the most consummate performers in wrestling history. So, how did he get to this level of greatness? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey so far in Instant Classic, The Christian Cage Story. William Jason Riso was born in Kitchener, Ontario on November 30th, 1973 to parents Carol and Randy. As a child, William, or Jay as he would become known to his friends, was a big fan of both pro wrestling and hockey, and it would be these dual loves that would see him form an early bond with Adam Copeland, the two meeting in high school and eventually starting their training in wrestling together in 1994. From that point on, both men's careers would be forever intertwined, but in those early days, it was Jay that impressed his trainers most with his natural ability and smoothness in the ring. It was also around this time that he developed his in-ring name of Christian Cage as well, a combination of two of his favorite actors, Christian Slater and Nicolas Cage. And by 1997, he had firmly established himself on the Canadian independent circuit, where he primarily worked as a tag team with Copeland, the two going by the name High Impact, and then later on, the Suicide Blondes. Soon after that, Adam would get the opportunity to have a tryout match with WWE. And once he was signed, he was even able to put in a good word for his friend, this eventually leading to Jay getting a contract offer in 1998. Now being repackaged as just Christian, Riso would make his main roster debut later that year as the kayfabe brother of Copeland, then going by the name of Edge. And from there, the duo would join forces with Gangrel to form the Brood, a stable of purported wrestling vampires most memorable for having one of the coolest entrance themes in WWE history. And while Edge was clearly being pegged as the breakout star of the group even at this early stage, Christian was still able to achieve some success in his own right, winning the Light Heavyweight Championship from Taka Michinoku at October 18th's Judgment Day pay-per-view. That being said though, most of their victories at this time would come as a unit, but by the summer of 1999, a change was in the air, and Christian and Edge would separate themselves from Gangrel. In retaliation for this, Gangrel would then align himself with the Hardy Boys, something that sparked a years-long feud between the two teams and would go on to change the game for tag team wrestling in North America. It all started with WWE's first ever tag team ladder match at October 17, 1999's No Mercy, a match which blew fans away with its stunt-heavy spectacle. Of course, the Hardys won that night, but this was secondary to the performance all four men had put on. And things would only continue to get crazier from there over the next couple of years, as they all managed to solidify themselves as major players in the company through a series of matches that would later include the Dudley Boys too. Now, we've already done videos on Edge as well as both of the Hardy Boys elsewhere on this channel, so we've discussed this period in great detail already, but without sounding too much like a broken record, let's just say that the Triangle Ladder match that took place at WrestleMania 16, combined with the two tables, ladders, and chairs matches that followed at SummerSlam 2000 and WrestleMania 17 respectively, have since gone down in history as perhaps the pinnacle of what a ladder match could be, and certainly represented the peak of tag team wrestling in WWE. That said, the high-risk, stunt-filled style of bouts they were putting on created a lot of wear and tear on the body, so it was inevitable that they couldn't do this forever. It helped then that around this time, Christian and Edge had already started building a more character-heavy gimmick, as they started portraying a couple of goofy heels reminiscent of Bill and Ted, something which saw them arguably get even more over than they had during their iconic ladder matches, as now they were showing the full scope of their personality, making fans fall in love with them even when they were supposed to be booing them. And with the increased success the duo were having, it was becoming clearer and clearer that WWE had plans to split them up so they could give Edge the big singles push. And this started presenting himself on screen when, after losing the WWE Tag Team titles in mid-2001, the Rated R superstar decided to go out on his own and enter the King of the Ring tournament, eventually winning the whole thing much to the chagrin of Christian, who, in a fit of jealousy, would turn on his kayfabe brother. This leading to the two feuding over the Intercontinental title for a while. And while many assumed that this feud was only being done to get Edge to the next level, it was actually Christian who got an early win during it, briefly snagging the Intercontinental Gold at September 23rd's Unforgiven pay-per-view before losing it back to his friend a month later. Yes, the Kitchener native refused to let himself be the odd man out in this situation, and so worked harder than ever to make sure the company knew just how valuable he was. And this value was recognized, as soon after ending his feud with Edge, he would win the European Championship from Bradshaw, something Captain Charisma would hold on to past the new year after that. Things were looking up then, and he would soon find himself in a feud with Diamond Dallas Page leading up to WrestleMania 18. Unfortunately though, this feud would climax with Christian losing his European title on the grandest stage of them all, and this caused him to throw a tantrum in the ring afterwards, something he would continue to do in the weeks that followed as part of his new gimmick, one which saw him take the subsequent mockery that American fans were raining down upon him and turn it against them as he joined forces with Lance Storm and Test to create the Un-Americans, a stable of Canadian performers who claimed that WWE and its fans were prejudiced against them. And this unit would see Christian find success once more, as along with Storm, he became a WWE Tag Team Champion after beating Edge and Hulk Hogan at July 21, 2002's Vengeance. From there, the Un-Americans would defect from SmackDown over to Raw, taking the gold with them as they teamed with Triple H to beat The Rock, The Undertaker, Booker T, and Goldust in a stellar 8-man tag on August 12th of that year, successfully establishing themselves as players on the Red brand right out of the box. At SummerSlam a couple of weeks later, Christian and Lance Storm retained their tag team titles too, and they would follow this up by attempting to burn a US flag on Raw the night after, only to be stopped by a babyface coalition of Americans. Soon after that, and they would lose their titles to the team of the Hurricane and Kane, and after that, they would go on a string of losses that eventually led to all of the heels turning on each other, disbanding the team in the process. Yes, it was a sad end for the stable, but Christian didn't let this get to him, as he quickly started teaming with another fellow Canadian in Chris Jericho, these two even going on to win the tag team gold themselves later that year. And with this new fire lit under him, he reinvented himself once more as by April of 2003, he started referring to himself as the new People's Champion, labeling his fans the Peeps. By that year's Judgment Day pay-per-view, he was once again Intercontinental Champion too, and soon after that, he and Jericho began a romance angle with Trish Stratus and Lita, one which saw the two heels place bets on who would get to sleep with their respective conquest first. Despite this bet though, for $1 Canadian, Jericho soon realized that he had real feelings for Trish, and this led to him turning face and separating himself from his tag partner after an argument between the two. Of course, this incensed Christian and caused him to seek his revenge, with the two eventually settling their beef at WrestleMania 20 where, to the surprise of many, the new People's Champion revealed that Trish had been with him all along as she turned on Y2J, costing him the match. From here, Christian and Trish began an on-screen relationship and even added a heavy in the form of Tyson Tomko to their stable, this carrying on until May of 2004 when the former Intercontinental Champion suffered a back injury which put him on the shelf for the next 4 months. After returning, he finished up his feud with Jericho and then set about winning gold once more, though he would be unable to do this in either singles or tag team competition over the course of the next year. By June of 2005, however, things looked to be improving as he was drafted over to SmackDown and given his very own interview segment called The Peep Show, something which turned out to be very popular with fans at the time as it gave him a chance to let his excellent promo skills shine on a regular basis. Sadly though, this was not enough to get him back into title contention, and it had even been rumored that Vince McMahon didn't believe Christian had it in him to be a top guy, primarily because he didn't like his face and allegedly had suggested that it be covered by a blue dot whenever he was on screen. If true, it's just another example of the weirdness of the boss, but it still must have been frustrating for the Canadian to hear. Enough for him to decide against signing a new contract when his old one expired on October 31st of 2005, instead pitching his tent to TNA, where he would begin referring to himself as the Instant Classic, someone who could put on a better match than anyone else on the card on any given night. And his TNA debut, which came at November 13th's Genesis pay-per-view, saw him stake his claim to the company's top title, something he had never been allowed to challenge for in WWE. By February 12, 2006, he would prove that this had been a mistake after all, as he was able to defeat Jeff Jarrett to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for the first time, subsequently going on to prove his instant classic moniker as he defended the belt against the likes of Monty Brown and Abyss in the months that followed. But that wasn't to say that this was all he was doing then. No, now out from under the shackles of WWE, Christian wanted to expand his world even further, and so he made a couple of appearances for Ring of Honor in May 2006, the first of which saw him team with Colt Cabana to defeat Bryan Danielson and Christopher Daniels, and the second of which saw him lose to Daniels in a singles match. That said though, TNA remained his home base, and so it would be there that he would focus most of his energies. Sadly, it would also be there where he lost the NWA World title to Jeff Jarrett on June 18th in a King of the Mountain match. Not that this was too much of a disaster though, because not long afterwards, Cage turned heel and started a high-profile feud with Sting. This led to the Instant Classic bringing in his old muscle Tyson Tomko to help him out, as both he and the Stinger set their sights on destroying each other while simultaneously trying to win the NWA title from the, at the time, champion, Abyss. All this climaxed in a three-way elimination match at January 14, 2007's Final Resolution pay-per-view, and saw Christian finally regain the gold. Soon after that, and he would form a new stable called Christian's Coalition with Tomko, Scott Steiner, and later on other performers, such as AJ Styles and Abyss. And with this new family by his side, he continued to rack up the title defenses against the likes of Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe. Of course, in pro wrestling though, nothing lasts forever, and eventually Christian's coalition began to splinter, with members either leaving or being booted from the stable over the course of the spring. And to make matters worse, the National Wrestling Alliance would soon after this strip him of the world title after he refused to defend the gold at live events. Despite no longer officially being the champion though, Cage continued to hold on to the physical belt, and this eventually led to TNA creating their own world title from its ashes, separate from the NWA entirely. Of course, it wouldn't be Christian who would be the first TNA champion, but he would get into another high-profile feud as a make-good, this time with Samoa Joe as the two men battled it out throughout the remainder of 2007. Following that, the Instant Classic briefly joined Kurt Angle's Angle Alliance, all while trying to win the world title throughout 2008. Ultimately though, he would be unsuccessful at this, and it was this lack of success that saw him grow more and more frustrated with himself, this eventually leading to him leaving the company altogether when his contract expired in November of that year, immediately re-signing with WWE afterwards, and vowing this time to climb to the top of the ladder over in New York. Now, in the years that followed, it's been rumored that Christian's big return to WWE was supposed to see him be the man behind a series of attacks on Jeff Hardy in a huge surprise moment. However, when news of his signing leaked online, Vince McMahon decided to scrap the whole idea and instead have him re-debut on ECW. If true, then this is disappointing, as it kind of took the wind out of the big comeback. But with that said, Captain Charisma wasted no time in re-establishing himself to WWE fans anyway, as he quickly defeated the ECW champion Jack Swagger in a non-title match, then took part in the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 25. And by April 26, 2009's Backlash, he went one step further than that by winning the top prize on the Hardcore brand, defending it for most of the year after against the likes of Tommy Dreamer, William Regal, and Shelton Benjamin. In fact, by December of 2009, he had become the longest-reigning ECW champion since its revival, and he would hold on to it until the following February, only losing it to Ezekiel Jackson right as the brand was dissolved once more. Yes, it had been a great run, but fans knew that Christian had far more to offer than just being a top guy on the C Show, so they were happy to see him drafted back over to Raw on February 22, 2010 then, where he made short work of Carlito in his first match back, earning himself a spot in the WrestleMania 26 Money in the Bank ladder match. But it wouldn't actually be Raw where he finally reached the top of the mountain. No, that wouldn't happen until he was drafted over to SmackDown on May 7th of that same year. Of course, this wouldn't come to pass right away. He would first have to go through a series of smaller programs and deal with a pectoral injury in September, which would put him out of action for 5 months. When he returned after that, however, he realigned himself on screen with Edge as the two entered into a feud with Alberto Del Rio and Brodus Clay, Christian even appearing in his friend's corner when he defended the World Heavyweight title against Del Rio at WrestleMania 27. But deep down, the Kitchener native knew he didn't want to be waiting outside the ring. He wanted to be in there with the title around his own waist instead. Fans could see this too and prepared themselves for an eventual showdown between the two Canadians. When Edge shocked the wrestling world by retiring less than 3 weeks later after being diagnosed with spinal stenosis though, this threw everything up in the air. Not only had the company lost one of its biggest stars, but it was now left without a world champion. Quickly then, WWE set up a match to crown a new champion at May 1st, 2011's Extreme Rules pay-per-view, a match that would feature the top two contenders, Alberto Del Rio and Captain Charisma himself. And it was on that night that Christian finally proved to the world that he had what it took to step out of the shadow of his best friend and become the man in the biggest wrestling company in the world to win the World Heavyweight title for the first time. It was a moment that fans had been waiting to see for years, something they thought they might never see by this point, but finally, it had happened. The only thing that ruined it then was when he lost it to Randy Orton just 2 days later. He did get to have a title program with Orton after this, but Christian would be portrayed as such a whiny loser throughout it that it was almost impossible to take him seriously as a contender. Even when, after a number of failed attempts, he did manage to briefly regain the belt, it would only happen after he spat in the face of the Viper during a match, goading Orton into getting himself disqualified and losing the title as per a pre-match stipulation. And this second reign didn't add up to much in the end either, as he lost it right back the next month. Yes, it was a disappointment all around and a particularly sad one to see, as it felt like the instant classic never even got a chance to get out of the starting blocks as champion. Why this happened is again subject to much speculation, but the prevailing theory is that the boss just didn't see Christian as a top-level player and felt buyer's remorse immediately after putting the belt on him. Whatever the reason, this would be the Canadian's only short run at the top of the card during his second WWE run, and from there, he would float back down to the upper mid-card as he feuded with the likes of Sheamus and The Big Show. He did manage to feel like a true star on more than one occasion, but this wouldn't happen in WWE. No, instead it would be in TNA where, as a part of the deal the two companies had made to allow Ric Flair to appear at the Hall of Fame in 2012, Christian Cage made a special one-night return to Impact, much to the delight of his peeps over there. Back in WWE though, things would never reach that level. Christian, a man who believed in his ability as a performer, was convinced that he had a lot more to offer, but the company didn't see things the same way, and after having him mill around doing little of consequence over the next couple of years, they stopped using him altogether, quietly labeling him as an alumni on their website, suggesting that he had retired. Of course, Christian knew nothing of this and insisted he could still go. Sadly though, WWE doctors disagreed and felt that his history of concussions had now made it too dangerous for him to step inside the ring, with them refusing to clear him from there on in. And it took him a while to accept this, but by 2015, it looked like Christian Cage had finally come to peace with the doctor's decision as he began to ease into retired life, making occasional non-wrestling appearances on WWE TV in the years that followed, and starting a podcast with Edge called ENC's Podcast of Awesomeness, something which was eventually segued into a WWE Network original, The Edge and Christian Show, that totally reeks of awesomeness. And that was that. With both friends retired, it seemed like this would be their life from then on. That was until Edge surprised everyone when he returned to action at the 2020 Royal Rumble, leading to speculation that Christian might one day be able to do the same too. This was even teased on the June 15th episode of Raw, but it wouldn't be until the 2021 Royal Rumble that Captain Charisma made a shock reappearance after 7 years of having been away from the ring. It seemed obvious then that, given Edge was entering into a world title program with Roman Reigns in the lead-up to WrestleMania 37, Christian would be signed up to a new contract and made part of that storyline. It was confusing to everyone then that WWE seemed to have no interest in using him anymore, and no one was more confused by this than Tony Khan, who after speaking to Cage, realized that he was a free agent and promptly signed him to a multi-year AEW deal. And in the weeks that led up to March 7th, 2021's Revolution pay-per-view, a surprise signing was teased. Fans speculated about who it could be: CM Punk, Kurt Angle, or maybe even the instant classic himself. Those who guessed the latter were only too happy then to see him hit the ring that night, signing his new deal there and then as the company announced he would be a full-time performer going forward. On the Dynamite following this, he even had a showdown with Kenny Omega, suggesting a match between the two is coming soon. And while we don't necessarily think Christian needs to be headlining pay-per-views and world title matches at this point when there are younger guys who could use the spot instead, having him challenge the Cleaner in a TV bout sounds like a great way to use him to his full extent, no doubt drawing a good rating while giving fans an excellent match in the process. Regardless of how he's booked though, Christian's real value in AEW will surely be what he can teach the next generation. As one of the best workers in the business, he no doubt has a lot of knowledge to impart, so we can't wait to see what he does when he gets in the ring with the likes of Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara, because there are few who have more to offer than him when it comes to in-ring expertise, and that's why he'll always be the instant classic. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.